Hello everyone, I'm Mark Coates, Director of Strategic Industry Engagements at Bentley Systems, and welcome to today's webinar, Recovering from COVID-19, Future Ways of Working. This is a Major Projects Association member webinar series, and we look forward to an interactive and engaging session. Our presenters today are from Moorhouse Consulting.
Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon and a warm welcome to you all. My name is Tayo Oyeton. I am the Transport Sector Lead and Infrastructure Lead at Moorhouse. We're a management consultancy firm, and our goal is to help our clients turn strategy into sustainable outcomes. Today we will be discussing how organizations can recover from COVID, and we will be sharing our insights structured around 5 key themes. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers, and they are James Easterbrook, our Strategy and Customer Lead, Anna Risson, our People and Change Lead, David Griffin, our Delivery and Performance Lead, and last but not least, Don McShee, our Digital and Technology Lead. As Marcus said, if you have any questions, please submit this at any point during the webinar. One of my colleagues will be monitoring all of these questions, and we will address them at the end during our Q&A session. Now, it goes without saying that these are unprecedented times, and there is general consensus that COVID will have lasting impacts on the way that we do pretty much everything. UK government debt is at historic levels. The IMF expects global GDP to shrink by 5% this year, and economists are forecasting a downturn that will be more severe than the last recession. With a major projects lens, we have seen the impacts of COVID manifest itself in various forms. For example, some projects have lost their funding because there's a need to prioritize investment elsewhere. Some have been paused, for example, Crossrail and some of the HS2 sites where there's been a need to minimize health risk to the workforce. Some projects have been deferred because of the high levels of uncertainty that we're seeing. Others have been rebaselined because, of course, productivity in some sectors is no longer what it used to be. And some projects have been cancelled altogether, unfortunately, because, of course, the business case just doesn't stack up anymore. And we've seen this particularly in those sectors where there's been a significant drop in demand. For example, some of the major UK airports or on the tube network where demand is down a staggering 95%. Now, on the flip side, we're also seeing some projects that have been accelerated. For example, transformation projects that are seeking to bank the efficiencies that have been realized from post-COVID ways of working, or indeed the increased government funding that we're seeing for mobility schemes and the £2 billion recently allocated to active travel, where cyclists and pedestrians are being prioritised over motorists. In short, these are very challenging times for the whole industry, whether you are an owner, operator, developer, supplier, or investor. Nobody can be certain what COVID means for the future in terms of what will change, what won't change, and how long it'll take before things return to quote-unquote normal, if ever. In our view, this is a time where organizations need to think outside of the box, reimagine their business model, connect with their customers in a different way, get the most from their people, and change at pace in order to not only survive, but thrive in this new normal that we find ourselves in. To unpick all of this in a bit more detail, we will cover the following 5 themes. Reimagining Your Business Model by James, The Transformed Workplace by Anna, Operational Efficiency by David, Digital Transformation, and also The Speed of Transformation by Don. I will now hand over to the first of our speakers, James Easterbrook, who will cover Reimagining Your Business Model.
Thanks very much, Tayo. So, broadly speaking, in the West, or indeed at Europe at least, we're through the initial response and into the recovery from COVID-19. And I think we've all learned some really valuable lessons about how our organizations work and what's really important to us and our customers or users. And many organizations are applying these lessons to rethink how they work, so doing what they do better. But the first question we really wanted to ask is whether we can go a step further can we actually use this most extreme of all black swan events to reimagine what we do? And we've looked at this through 4 lenses: society, customers, proposition, and operations. And we've tried to provide some guidance on what we think organizations should think about and do. So society. Now, we've all got really used to seeing charts and curves lately, but the curve for the use of the phrase new normal shows 0 signs of flattening at all. But are we actually getting to a new normal? If we take a step back, whilst there's clearly been massive changes, you could argue that a lot of what we're seeing is actually just an acceleration of what's going to happen anyway. So let's look at some of those trends. A sharper focus on the value of the human workforce. So the trends towards automation are not new, but the pandemic has created this weird paradox. It's exposed the critical frailty of humans, and it's put much more focus on the value of real people, whether that's NHS heroes or services only humans can do. And anyone who's seen the queues outside hairdressers over the weekends can see that. And we think there's 3 pathways here. For some organisations, humans now represent an unacceptable business risk, and they're going to push much harder on automation. Others are going to recognise the innate value of human input and double down on their investment in talent. And then a third route is going to be investing to amplify the potential of humans through technology. But whatever the case, organisations are going to need to be really clear on the use case for humans and focus hard on giving them what they need to excel. Next comes political uncertainty. We've seen some pretty unlikely political figures come to power recently, and that's brought real uncertainty for business. And I think most organisations were cautiously navigating that before COVID shook it all up again. It's clearly been really hard to plan. We're all going to need to stay really close to government direction and advice, but that's not going to be enough. We're going to have to get much better at thinking and judging for ourselves, exploring and modelling multiple scenarios, and developing the agility to change tack quickly. Finally, sustainability. Having seen weeks of clean air, it's really tempting to think that the world's turned a corner on progress towards environmental sustainability, but sadly, some of the figures on pollution in Chinese cities that were first to emerge from lockdown suggest not. But if policy and government action doesn't match the green recovery rhetoric, it's likely that voters and customers are going to demand more action anyway, regardless. So businesses should really expect to be challenged much harder by customers and investors on their action on environmental and social issues. And similarly, public services providers are going to need to demonstrate how temporary measures like extra cycle lanes in cities are going to be made permanent. And whatever the impact these trends are going to have, the key capability for organisations here is adaptability. And clearly, staying close to the customer and their needs is going to be crucial in doing that. So let's think about the customer then. We've seen a huge shift in the way customers interact with products and services, and an evolution in what they want and need during the crisis. And how these changes fall away or solidify is going to really dictate how organisations need to reimagine their models. So the first thing to understand is the new jobs to be done. The jobs to be done approach is championed by Clayton Christensen. And for those who are unfamiliar, this essentially says that you should try and understand the functional and emotional job that a customer wants to complete, and then position yourself to help them do that. So organisations are going to need to recommit to gathering customer insight, and that insight then needs to be applied throughout the organisation, driving decision-making on products, services, and the overall operation. And I think Dixon's Carphone gives us a really good example here with their new remote advice service that clearly recognises the need for human explanation and reassurance when buying tech, and delivers it through remote interaction rather than in a store. It's also about building on the emotional connection established during the crisis. And we've seen a number of companies working really hard to maintain engagement with their customers, building a sense of community and driving loyalty in the process. On the flip side, of course, there's others who've really damaged their emotional connection and are going to need to work out how to fix it. Hiscox is a great example. It entered the crisis with really one of the strongest and most distinctive brands in insurance, and now they find themselves on the wrong end of public ire and a class action lawsuit for not paying out when people thought they should. Perhaps most important, though, is getting practical for the customer. So for any business that isn't entirely digital, the return of a physical customer interaction has got to be carefully planned and managed. So for some, that might seem impossible. How can a bar or a nightclub create any sort of atmosphere in a socially distanced world, and let alone attract the kind of footfall that makes the running costs viable? It certainly explains the fantastic reception we saw for the news on support for cultural organisations over the weekend. The first thing, clearly, is to make sure that customers can see their safety has been taken into account. So moving from the kind of cheerful lo-fi solutions to professional signage and carefully designed layouts is going to help. And some of the initial figures we've seen suggest people really do want to spend, But unlocking that in a sustainable way and getting commitment from customers is going to require building trust and confidence. So in essence, although everything has changed, the reality is not much has changed from a customer perspective. It's all about understanding customers' needs, building products and services that meet those needs, and adapting fast in what you offer. So if we've understood the big trends that have been accelerated and the new customer needs, then what we offer as organisations comes next, and that's proposition. And for me, that has to start with sharpening purpose. So the last few months have forced us all to reconsider why we do what we do. Grocery retail has gone from scrapping over share of basket to feeding the nation, and logistics has gone from parcel delivery to critical national infrastructure. Broadband's gone from package add-on in a comparison site to connectivity lifeline. Organisations are going to need to take the time to understand what's really important in what they do and how they can reinforce and build on that in the future. There's just not going to be room for anything vague and tenuous. Next comes innovation. And we say, of course, necessity is the mother of all invention. And if the crisis has done nothing else positive, it's driven an explosion in innovative thinking. In fact, April was one of the busiest months ever for UK patent inquiries. Beyond this sort of formal innovation, though, people have had to find ways to get things done under lockdown conditions. And we've seen a real shortening of approval processes and the acceptance of managed risk and more of a sense of why not amongst many of our clients. Now, we're obviously going to see some increased control post-lockdown, but organisations need to figure out how they can capture and harness that spirit and behaviour that they've seen, encouraging people to bring that kind of rapid, connected crisis thinking into their settled roles is a huge opportunity. Another theme is going direct. So even before the crisis, disintermediation was a trend, and we've seen a huge increase in over-the-top and direct-to-consumer services. And the previous drivers for that might have been extra margin or getting closer to the customer. But we've added a new driver, which is the risk of being over-reliant on a distribution platform that can be switched off overnight. You think about the movie industry seeking routes to market for new titles through streaming services and consumer goods firms creating subscription services that give them a hedge against stores being shuttered. But however hard an organisation invests in insight and whatever innovative proposition thinking it does, that's toothless until you can make it real through the operating model. And so from that operations perspective, we've selected just a few key elements to consider. So strategy, number one. Long-term strategies just don't hold water anymore. Organisations will need to develop much shorter strategy cycles, looking at markets, trends and customer needs on an ongoing basis. And that feels really challenging, but in reality, it's probably going to drive the kind of pace and responsiveness that the highest performing businesses have already. Finance. Financial processes have had to adapt really quickly. So what used to take months of business case development and board approval have been decided in a matter of days. And the average finance department is going to need to figure out how they codify that enabling behaviour whilst balancing future risk. People. We're going to talk in more detail about the impact on people later in this seminar, but one key trend we've observed is that high performers have generally accelerated through lockdown, and they're going to be looking for new challenges, whilst low performers are becoming much less productive and necessitating more intervention and more direction. And finding a way to manage that across a large workforce is going to be critical. Technology. So we've all gone through a kind of turbocharged adoption cycle for remote working technology to keep things going, but there are some medium and long-term things to think about. So for example, in the education sector, how can you provide a world-class hybrid experience of remote and in-person learning? And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how quickly people move through the curve from, oh wow, they've managed to put that online, to this isn't a very good online experience. Customers are going to get more demanding and less forgiving, and that's going to happen quickly. And then facilities. So post-COVID businesses are also going to need to define a much sharper use case for expensive physical space. I was talking to someone recently who runs a digital ad business, and he said, I could kill off the office, I could rent ad hoc meeting space, and I could still afford to take everybody to Vegas once a month. Now, whether all of our employers are going to decide to take us to Vegas or not, having spaces that are reconfigured to focus on the activities that really require people to be together is going to be absolutely key. So in conclusion, whether it's proactive or reactive, this is the time to reimagine the business model, using the disruption of the crisis to think about how we respond to those accelerated trends in society, how we better understand what customers really want, how we shape products and services to meet their needs, and how we drive more agility and more adaptability in our organisations. So in short, it's making a plan not just to get through this, but to become better as a result. So I'd like to hand over to Anna Risson now, who's going to share thoughts on the transformed workplace that we need to expect.
Thanks, James. and good afternoon, everybody. Across industry, the last 4 months have seen transformation to people's ways of working change at an unprecedented rate. And as James mentioned, this is accelerating trends that have been discussed for many, many years. So I'm going to talk this afternoon to 6 key themes, starting with the virtual workplace. On this topic, I was really interested in preparing for this to reflect on an experiment that took place more than 25 years ago, back in the days before internet connections, laptops, and virtual meeting apps. But when on a single September day in 1994, 32,000 employees from telecommunications giant AT&T all worked from home on a single day to test the organization's ability to do this effectively. The test was considered a success. The organization was able to demonstrate its adaptability, and AT&T became an early adopter of widespread hot desking and home working. And interestingly, the benefits identified back then included cost reduction, increases in productivity, personal effectiveness and customer focus, the retention of experienced employees who it was felt would particularly benefit from the flexibility of working from home, and a reduction in air pollution from commuting reductions. So essentially the same set of benefits that a number of organisations have been discussing since the COVID-enforced lockdown of March this year. So why then was it that, given all of these benefits, remote working didn't become the norm 25 years ago? Well, the project revealed one important caveat, and that was for workplace transformation to stick. It needed to focus on deliberately, consciously redefine and reinforce the organisational culture, people strategies and policies, as well as the supporting infrastructure to make all of this happen. So now, with more than 50% of workers indicating their preference to continue working remotely once the current restrictions are lifted, there are therefore a number of deliberate actions organisations need to take to redefine their long-term people strategy. And today I'll focus on this through a number of lenses. So thinking about productivity and engagement, it's a pervasive view now that the move to remote working for many has resulted in a short-term increase in productivity, attributed to reductions in time lost during the working day, and also people's ability to flex and optimise their work time around personal requirements and preferences. And a number of our clients are seeing other examples of productivity improvement. For example, in some places, dramatic reductions in staff sickness. So as organisations look ahead, they're seeking to institutionalise this advantage. For one of our clients, a large multinational engineering firm, their USP for many years had been customer intimacy. They matched local staff with local clients, and they resisted the move to offshored solutions, assuming that they'd be sacrificing quality for price. However, with everyone working remotely, it quickly became apparent that they could build teams of experts around propositions rather than by geography. And the individuals best placed to provide some of the technical solutions and expertise to their customers were located around the world and could be accessed often at lower costs. So accessing these long-term increases in productivity will mean developing a people strategy and organisational structures that have the ability to flex and also to support evolving ways of delivering products and services. To make this happen, the intimacy of HR functions with the business will be more important than ever. Organisations will need to consider how can they best engage with their employees to understand what's working now that's supporting the productivity spike they want to retain going forward, and what will they need to change. And on this point of change, this brings me neatly on to well-being. This potential downside of greater productivity has come into sharp focus since the COVID lockdown. A recent study found that 41% of people believe the last few months have had a negative impact on their mental well-being. And here we're learning from our clients, particularly in the health and public sectors, who've invested significantly in expanding access to emotional support services for employees, providing confidential phone lines and access to virtual therapies and well-being apps, as well as establishing and running peer-to-peer support sessions to discuss the concerns of those who've experienced difficult events. But it's not just the public sector. One of our private sector clients has also been providing training to those giving support in skills for life, such as empathy training, and posting an accredited list of mental health champions on their intranet. On top of this, and particularly pertinent, they're regularly using the tool Slido to get real-time anonymous feedback from their employees. Because while trends in wellbeing initiatives are emerging and continue to do so, extensive employee engagement within your organisation to tailor the initiatives to those that employees are finding most effective for their circumstances is key. Moving on to the fourth point of how to maintain and develop a culture virtually. According to an international Glassdoor survey, 75% of employees pay close attention to a company's culture before applying for a job. And 56% going so far as to saying that culture is now more important than salary in their choice. But workplace culture has historically been felt through physical presence. So remote working has to be about more than giving employees a laptop. Otherwise, this shift to the new normal has the potential to erode well thought through and developed organisation cultures. But with some creativity and imagination, virtual barriers can be broken down. One of our large global clients undertook an organisation-wide coffee roulette initiative involving randomly matching two people from across functions to meet for 15 minutes and have a coffee catch-up each week, recreating that water cooler moment. And here at Moorhouse, unable to get together as a firm, we held a week of opt-in early morning and evening social activities and replaced our usual monthly business update get-togethers with punchy weekly updates to keep us all connected. Continuous improvement of these new expressions of company culture are necessary to ensure the culture remains cohesive and provides sufficient opportunity to engage and bring together different cohorts within your workforce. Be those cohorts office-based, operational, remote working or field-based, there's an important need to continue the connection, albeit virtually. Next, diversity. It's definitely not new news that diversity is hugely beneficial for the workplace. A recent study is suggesting that gender diversity increases your likelihood of financial outperformance of the market by 25% and ethnic diversity by a whopping 35%. So in the wake of COVID-19, some of the barriers to accessing more diverse talent have been torn down, something we know is much needed and really needs to be harnessed. For example, in 2019 in the UK, 15% of families were headed by a single parent and 19% of the working age population reported that they had a disability. And beyond this demographic view of diversity, cognitive diversity is the most powerful tool in complex problem solving. As remote and flexible working expands our ability to cut across geographic and technical silos and across nations and time zones, organisations have the power to form teams that harness the power of perspective, pooling collective brain power to problem solve and innovate. And to seize the opportunity inherent in this increased diversity, organisations need to broadcast their commitment to remote and flexible working, update and align their recruitment and retention policies, and really enable collaboration and interconnection throughout the organisation. Underpinning all of this will be an impact on travel, estate, and the infrastructure. A number of my colleagues have and will touch on this further. So to conclude this section, in the time frame since the global lockdown has been imposed, we've seen a rapid acceleration of remote and flexible working, and employees have been rewired to a new normal. As Lenin famously said, there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. So for organisations to thrive post-COVID, while they've had to quickly adapt, they now need to reimagine and reinvent their workplace. And in order to realise the benefits from the long term, organisations need to actively manage their workplace change, considering each of the themes I've discussed today, with extensive employee engagement being key to getting this right. I'll now hand over to David, who will talk us through operational efficiency.
That's great. Thank you, Anna. So in this section, I'd like to share our perspectives on two areas. There's how organisations can learn from COVID to improve the operational efficiency and create business agility, and the transformational outcomes that organisations should look to achieve to help navigate these uncertain times. The speed and the depth of the economic damage caused by COVID has taken us all by surprise, and the implications vary significantly between different sectors. Sectors like consumer goods, grocery retailers and telcos have experienced significant increase in consumer demand, and the organisations had to rapidly scale their operations while also undergoing the significant disruption of moving the workforce to remote working. Leisure and hospitality industries have been hit particularly hard. A good example is Expedia. Almost overnight, their business model was reversed when they went from customers selecting to book millions of holidays and then having to suddenly process the cancellations and obtain refund from partners, while also having to seek additional funding to secure the business. The COVID crisis has exposed and exacerbated the inefficiencies within organisations and their suppliers, highlighting the activities that create value and also those that create complexity. The uncertain outlook must be seen as a call to action for organisations to remove the operational inefficiencies and ensure the effective allocation of resources to create the most value for the organisation. The drive, though, for operational efficiency cannot only focus on cost. It must also be framed through the lens of creating business agility, allowing an organisation to better flex to a changing environment that will require investing in strengthening in existing capabilities and also building new ones. The rapid change imposed on organisations also presents significant opportunity to galvanise organisations to challenge conventional wisdom and also provide a springboard for transformation. So, how can organisations improve the operational efficiency and create enterprise agility? Firstly, organisations need to stress test their business strategy based on the lessons learned from the immediate crisis and the potential scenarios that could play out in the short to medium term. No one can predict the future, which is why scenario planning is so important to challenge whether the existing business strategy is still fit for purpose. Secondly, the business transformation needs to be guided by the refreshed business strategy and underpinned by clear transformational goals. We identified 5 operational levers that will help enable businesses to drive these efficiencies. So the operating model. This involves reviewing the existing operating models across the organisation and within business functions to assess the core services, processes and partners that create value. In the light of COVID, this should also include reviewing the delivery model to assess whether the current suppliers are the right partners to support the refreshed operating model. Over the last few months, it's been impressive how many organisations have rapidly flexed their operating models and continue to adapt their operations to the current environment. An example from Australia's, when the lockdown measures were imposed in India, Telstra and Vodafone Australia were suddenly faced with having to onshore all their contact centres, and almost overnight they had to repurpose existing staff, they had to hire new ones and implement new processes and systems. Secondly, process standardisation. So anecdotal evidence indicates that some organisations have seen an increase in productivity with the shift to remote working. Now, personally, I'm interested to understand how much of this productivity is actually being driven by people increasing their working hours rather than true productivity gain. To maintain the improved efficiency in productivity, this needs to be done in a sustainable way and can only be achieved through simplifying and automating processes. By redesigning internal processes, operations and organisations can make full use of tools like robotic process automation, chatbots and self-service, helping to empower a workforce whose need for face-to-face interaction has now been challenged. Process simplification is also important where organisations want to leverage the expertise of more partners to deliver services. Organisational capability. It's important that organisations recognise that their existing skills and capabilities will need to be strengthened and enhanced. A critical component of the transformation is the assessment of existing organisational capabilities and the identification of any capability gaps that need to be addressed to support the new ways of working. New capabilities could include developing skills to fully leverage digital tools and data, helping teams implement complex transformations, or enhancing supplier management capabilities. Supplier relationship management. So organisations need to reassess their supplier base to segment their suppliers and identify a set of strategic partners that will help create long-term value versus those suppliers where the strategy should primarily focus on delivering sustainable cost reduction. Establishing partnership with key suppliers will be critical to delivering the operational efficiency, as the majority of third-party spend will reside with these firms. and it's only through collaborative ways of working that transformative opportunities can be identified that will then lead to the innovation and significant savings. Establishing collaborative partnership also requires a different way of thinking and a shift away from traditional transactional relationships. Over the last few months, it's been interesting seeing how companies have reassessed their supplier relationships and formed new partnerships. In the pharma market, competitors like GSK and Sanofi rapidly collaborated in weeks to commence work on a vaccine. Commercial relationships like this would normally take months, if not years, to formalize. In Germany, McDonald's formed a personnel pact with Aldi, helping their employees work under temporary contract at Aldi while the McDonald's restaurants were shut. And recently, I was speaking with a senior exec at a consumer goods company who last year tried to persuade the board to diversify manufacturing away from China without success due to concerns on the costs. But within the last few months, not only have they shifted some of that manufacturing to other suppliers in Vietnam, they're also now considering to look to onshore some of the manufacturing back to the UK. And real estate footprint. So the real estate footprint and facilities management services will need to be reviewed to support the new operating model. The decision on the degree of remote working will need to be tailored to each organisation and in particular the culture of that organisation. As mentioned earlier, some organisations will probably shift to majority remote working, but others will just look to use this as an opportunity to rationalise their footprint and particularly potentially move away from higher cost locations. In fact, within the last few weeks, Unilever has actually announced that it will be consolidating 5 offices and actually move them all to a single new purpose-built campus in Kingston, and this will result in either shutting or significantly reducing their central London footprint. And we're currently working with a global pharma company who's now accelerating the rationalisation of their footprint, and they currently don't envisage opening their office, their head office, to the same degree as they do now, and are going to roll out a series of tests over the coming weeks and months to assess what works best for them. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Brilliant. The outcome of this strategic transformation must leave organisations with the structures, tools and capabilities to adapt and grow in an uncertain environment. And we see 4 outcomes. Cost transparency and flexibility. Having the transparency on your cost base and creating a new cost model that can be flexed to meet the challenging environment. Performance monitoring. Having a defined set of leading metrics that provide the early warning signals for businesses to identify the internal and external challenges, and the ability to monitor the performance of key processes and services to make then the necessary course corrections. Empowered and capable workforce. Having an empowered workforce with the capabilities to identify and deliver continued operation improvements and help to drive innovation. And there's an important link here with the performance monitoring, as employees need to understand how they're contributing towards the organisational goals and also seeing the performance of the business. And this is even more important with a dispersed workforce. And collaborative partnerships. The review will have identified a set of strategically aligned and commercially incentivised partners who will help drive improvements in services and support business agility. The operational improvement journey does not have to wait for the completion of the business strategy review or the op model design. The past few months have highlighted the inefficiencies within businesses and the benefits of making incremental improvements. With the right investments in people and capabilities, organisations can build on the success of navigating COVID and establish a transformed organisation able to succeed in these uncertain times. I'll now hand you over to Dom for the next section.
Thank you, David. So hi everyone, I'm going to be covering off digital transformation and then I'll spend a little bit of time talking about speed of transformation. So as you'll have heard from my colleagues today, digital enablement sits at the very core of how we have responded to COVID to date and actually how we're going to adjust to the new normal. Literally every day we're hearing about something around a new digital innovation enabling a new way of doing things, whether that's at the weekend seeing around the pharmaceutical labs, robots that are enabling truly human-free lab environments working on COVID vaccines, to the work that's being done out at Imperial College Hospital around enabling ward walks by hundreds of students through the individual senior doctor, rather than being present in the hospital with them, being able to do that from the safety of their home or socially distanced classroom. We're making leaps forward in technology, and COVID has really given us the opportunity to do that. I'm going to touch on 6 core themes in the digital and tech area that I think will continue to be enablers and drivers that will push us through our new normal. So the first one of these is the digitally enabling the workforce. So again, my colleagues have touched on this, but we've seen during lockdowns, social distancing, that workforce activities in many industries has been able to continue. Office-based work has continued for some industries to the region of 80% of their employees working, albeit remotely. And this model, many people want to continue. It's quite likely the business is going to find it hard to lure their employees back to a full-time daily commute and physical office space. The expectations of the workforce for flexibility, to be able to balance their work life and to find their own flow of productivity has never been greater. Organisations that seek to provide a solution through digital means will enable their employees to be really effective. We're also seeing other examples out there where we have other ways workforce is being transformed through digital solutions. Remote patient care being a big one that we're seeing with our clients. Many hospitals and GPs have managed to introduce video consultations, virtual waiting rooms, and remote patient aftercare through tools like wearables that enable monitoring and avoid the need for a patient to stay in hospital. And all of these things have historically had quite a lot of change resistance. That's really changed. The recognition, this new norm, has created an opportunity for these digital solutions to move at that lightning pace. We're hearing from our manufacturing clients that lights off factories are going to be something that they are genuinely taking on board. So the prospect of having entire factory sites that have no humans in the actual factory and that can be operated autonomously or remotely are becoming something that was something set in the future, but is now going to be a reality in the present. And then even through to robots in more conventional service-based environments are gaining traction. We've seen the advent of supermarkets where there's no interaction with a human, through to examples where bars are starting to think about how they can use a robot bartender to mix your mojito. There's going to be a lot of different ways that we see digital solutions enable different ways of working and taking workforce out of environments. The second area is digitally enabling the customer. So here, the expectation of the customer will continue to increase in new and interesting ways. As ever, customers are expecting a high quality and frictionless experience. James touched on this earlier, but absolutely this is something that will continue. Organisations that can understand their customer, use the data that they're gaining from their digital platforms to enable the services will be winners in this story. And getting products and services from companies will increasingly not require face-to-face interactions. So what are some of the features of this? Well, outstanding e-commerce solutions sit at the core of this. So enabling the employer to be presented with the right products at the right time, being able to enable them to receive those products in a manner that is fast and painless is key. Having new ways to engage and be innovative with the buyer will be key to this. There's lots of ways organisations are going to be looking at creating exciting ways to engage a consumer, help them buy the product and use the product, and receive a service from their organisation. And we're seeing examples like that out there now. I referenced a physical store, a supermarket, but actually we're seeing examples where some retailers are looking to kind of create a virtual reality supermarket experience where you can walk around and almost virtually feel the product as you move through to being able to see the sofa that sits in your living room and seeing whether the colour matches with the rest of the scheme. Some of these things are already here, but they're getting increased traction. And then finally, I've touched on this humanless service models, but increasingly products are going to have technology embedded in them that enable the customer to have a different experience, a humanless touch experience. So examples being Fridge freezers. My fridge freezer enables automatic diagnostics to be run, and it tells the company that there's something broken on it. They can let me know that it needs to be repaired. They can send an engineer out with the right part and fix the appliance there in a single visit. These are things that weren't around before, and I think we'll get even more traction as we move forward. To enable this, there's a few things that we'll have to do. So one of the key things here is adaptive technology. So as we've moved through COVID and we've gone through deployment of business continuity plans and shifts to virtual working, we've identified holes in our creaking infrastructure and flaws in the entire technology stack. For many years, CIOs and IT directors in many industries have been asked to do more with less and seen their budgets being put under pressure year on year. Now is an opportunity to invest in solutions that will unlock the constraints of legacy and increase resilience and reliability. And the solutions that enable flexibility, scalability, and the ability to move at pace will win out here. So cloud is nothing new, but COVID has shone a light on the constraints imposed by on-prem technologies. Many organizations have stepped up their cloud adoption and often are taking now a cloud-first or cloud-only approach. Architectures that are open and flexible will drive forward at pace. Enabling ease of connectivity between systems, technology, and data models will increase the importance of become increasingly important in our digital ecosystems as they become diverse and connected. Open APIs being an example of this. And I reference green screens here. Some of you may be my age and know what the heck I'm talking about, but the reality is there's a lot of systems in big enterprise organizations that are still dated back from the 80s that are considered safe, stable, or too painful to update. And it's my opinion that many of these systems be revisited as they are representing the millstone around the neck of that organization. The digital resilience space, we've seen deployment of continuity plans, triggering and response and recovery approaches. And for some organizations, that's proven that they were left lacking. There are opportunities to push the focus around resilience by design, develop realistic business continuity plans that make businesses more resilient to genuine future shocks. Having solutions that have high uptime, irrespective of crisis or event, will be a focus. In the middle of all of this, we're rolling out a set of technology solutions that are going to increasingly rely on data being transferred outside of an organization. The workforce and customer examples I used being two. Now, increasingly, that's going to create an opportunity for cyber attack. This is a great opportunity afforded to cyber criminals and hackers that I'm sure they're going to take advantage of. And the ability for them to steal, disrupt on a local, national, or global level is a real concern. So increasingly, building systems that are secured by design will be absolutely key to success. And then finally, business continuity and DR were focused on the wrong things in some of these instances. So we'll need to reflect on whether our DR and BCP is really fit for purpose. AI is going to be increasingly at the core of our solutions. Adapting to new ways of working has shown that organizations have not automated enough. We need to be clear in terms of there's no single tool that can replace the workforce. James touched on this earlier. There are many opportunities to automate more processes in the pursuit of higher efficiency and effectiveness gains. The application of advanced technologies includes AI, machine learning, and increased use of augmenting the workforces where you're not doing full-blown automation or autonomy. There'll be lots of data that can be processed in this digital ecosystem. There's too much data for individuals to process, so increasingly using computers to take the load of processing, interpreting, and ultimately guiding or taking actions will be core. Again, this isn't new, but it's going to move at a much greater pace than we've seen previously. AI feels like it's been around for years. The reality is that that's going to take a significant leap forward, and much reflected by organizations like Gartner and their hype cycle that will be mainstream solutions in the next 10 years. And then finally, we touched on whilst organizations have protected their people during this period, it's also become clear that humans represent a vulnerability in the business model. And many organizations will seek to assess what that means and where they need to take that risk out of their business. And the last area in here is frontier tech. So really, we're entering a new frontier, a reimagined world post-COVID. And really, there's an opportunity to deliver this technology in new ways. increasingly we'll see that organisations will not accept things being delivered over a long window, taking many years to deliver. We'll expect that increasingly businesses will look to improve their delivery of agile solutions using DevOps, and increasingly around things like continuous development, continuous integration, being fast and confident in their tech deployment. So these are the 6 themes that I think are going to be absolutely core to digital transformation. So we can move to the next slide, please. So speed of transformation, I'll keep this quite short and sweet because, again, you've heard a lot of the themes in here over the course of this presentation. But if you take sort of anecdote of, if I'd gone to one of my clients back in 2019 before the COVID situation had really unfolded and said to them, look, I'm going to suggest we change our business model. Let's move all of the people from the office to their home locations. When we do that, why don't we give them some new technology and let's put some new software in there. Oh, by the way, I want to do it in 6 weeks. You can imagine them thinking I'd lost my mind a little bit there and maybe need to take a break from work for a period. But the reality is we've seen that happen and happen successfully. Global insurers that have deployed thousands of staff into virtual working environments, moving their contact centres without any loss of productivity. Media clients that have relocated their people and rolled out thousands of laptops and new IT equipment with no problem. NHS clients that have been able to do similar things where it typically would have taken months to transform their business in that way, months or years, and doing it in these sort of weeks of delivery. Again, wouldn't have imagined this possible pre-COVID, but we know it is real and possible. So it's shown us the art of the possible. And so what's driving it going forward? Well, market forces. COVID isn't going away. It's not just going to disappear, and the effects of it are not going to be are going to continue to be felt for an extended period. We'll be living with this for years. Customer expectations have changed. We all want great solutions. We're happy to switch suppliers, and we want things delivered fast. I don't think that's going to change. I think with the backdrop of what's happened, we'll see that increasingly a factor here. Employees and leadership also have seen the art of the possible here. You can imagine going back to your leadership and saying, oh, I need 2 years to do a tech project. They might look at you again slightly strangely after this. So there's 5 forces that I've called out here. The first one is insight from data. So really having the insight around where you're going, how your transformation is progressing at pace, is really key. Having near-time insight is really important. And the clients that we've worked with that were very successful during this time with things like contact center relocations, were taking data in a much richer way than they were at any other time. They were monitoring a wider range of metrics, taking qualitative data as well as quantitative to understand performance, customer satisfaction, customer experience, to really make sure that they were achieving the right outcomes. Methods. I touched on this a little bit during the digital transformation section, but the reality is that agile is something that I think will increasingly become even more prevalent. Many organizations have done it. Many organizations are saying they thought they had done it and now are taking a second look and launching Agile 2 initiatives to really overhaul their approaches and drive more activity through it. On the governance side, James touched on it earlier as well. We've been able to achieve things at a lot greater pace. We've been able to strip away red tape, investment processes, slow decisions, multiple boards, tuning business cases for a decision over months. I think this could be reduced significantly and will continue to be reduced significantly. Critically here, we have relaxed controls. We will go back to a place where some of those controls will need to come back in because we recognise that we've probably had to do some things in this situation that we probably wouldn't do in a normal working environment. The examples I think about are the scenarios where I ring my bank and I can hear a dog barking in the background, or the operator's doorbell ringing with an Amazon delivery, and I suddenly realise actually how private is this situation? How protected is my data in this scenario? Who else is there with that particular operator? And things like that we need to reflect on of whether those controls have been relaxed appropriately or too much. I think we'll put some governance back in, but I don't think it will go back to the way it was pre-COVID. Culture, really enabling your people to work at pace, enabling them to feel confident in making decisions, taking risks, calling out problems, inefficiency, having a culture of placing decision-making and empowerment on people is critical. And then finally in here, technology. You've heard my views on that one already, so I don't think you need a lot more to be said, really. But technology is going to continue to sit at the core of enabling transformation at pace. So in summary, you've heard from me on the market forces there, the external ones, market forces, customer expectations, internal forces, leadership and workforce, and critically, 5 things that can be considered there. Having the right insight from your data, having the methods and governance in place to work fast, enabling the right culture, and having the right technology foundations in place. Thank you. I'll hand over to Chair.
Thank you very much, Don, and a big thank you to all our speakers. In summing up, a few points really resonated with me. For example, we heard how post-COVID ways of working have led to increased productivity, increased engagement, and the ability to access a more diverse talent pool. However, well-being has suffered, and organizations will need to manage this carefully in the transformed workplace. And we also heard how delivering efficiency must go hand in hand with creating business agility in order for organizations to be successful. Now, without any further ado, let's move on to our Q&A session. So I'll hand over to Emily, who has been keeping an eye on the questions as they've been coming in.
Thanks, Tayo. So our first question is around organisations have an extraordinary knack of creating bureaucracy and constraint when they attempt to codify and process map new ways of working. Is there a new, liberating, post-COVID approach to this process that can capture and govern new ways of working without sucking the life out of them? I think that probably goes to David and James, please.
Yeah, I'll start on that one. I think there's probably 3 aspects to this. I think it really is a real risk, and this could just become a new kind of industry for people to create new books of process. But I think particularly empowerment, so thinking about your people and saying, okay, you've gone through this whole process of figuring out a new way to do it, so let's trust you to think about how we do things now. And I think that's really important. I think role modeling, so giving an example of what we feel the new good way of doing things looks like. And I think also just really good leadership. So picking up with people as they go through these new processes and making sure we're looking after them and thinking about them, all provide a way of being able to get the benefit without having to turn it into a bureaucratic nightmare.
Agreed. And just to build on those, I think the key thing here is around understanding the mindset shift. So as James mentioned, the empowerment, that will take a significant mindset shift from leadership to feel comfortable that people can take those decisions and have the remit to do that. And then with that as well as making sure that there is a clear structure around the governance, that people are aware of what needs to be reported up there, but also, again, the government needs to give people the freedom to actually operate within.
Great. So the next question that is just coming up is for Anna, and it's around how organisations can measure productivity and engagement.
Great, thanks, Emily. So I think there are on here, so measuring productivity in some spheres is easy. So if you're a call centre and you've moved virtually, you'll have a number of metrics that organisations are already routinely measuring, and you can very clearly see shifts in productivity. I think there are some other measures that are perhaps more intangible. I talked about staff sickness. There are some virtual tools out there through the Microsoft platform, for example, that share insights, my analytics around your productivity. But I think it's important to say that productivity is not the same for all in the remote working world, particularly post-COVID. I think we recognise that a number of employees have had to juggle complicated working arrangements, family arrangements, and have sometimes found themselves in a difficult situation. And I think that's where the second part of this question around engagement comes in, because I do think it needs to be very tailored and empathetic towards the particular circumstances. So while engagement is slightly harder to measure, it's also not impossible. There are a number of metrics that can be used to pull together feedback from employees about their level of commitment. Their essentially, engagement is as much about capturing ideas and perspectives and thoughts in building your strategy going forward. And I think there is a particular increase in the need for regular one-to-one engagement in these circumstances. I read a Gartner review that said that employees have approximately 25% greater need for individual recognition in these situations when they are working remotely from their colleagues. So greater engagement on a one-to-one level is important. And I think finally, we talked about a number of initiatives to maintain culture. I think it's, again, important to stress that these are optional. Not all employees are currently in a situation where they can find additional time in their day to engage in some of these extra activities. And so calling out individual performance such that it's clear those individuals who perhaps have gone above and beyond and those individuals who have just managed to balance all of the extra things going on in their lives at the moment are really important.
Great, thank you. I think we've got one final question that we'll share now, and there are a couple of others which we'll answer afterwards. But this one has come in around, there have been some amazing transformations in the NHS, but this hasn't been consistent, and some areas have not adapted well. How do we support systems to focus on the skills and consistent alignment of new technology, skills and leadership? So Don, on the technology point and the integration of technology with the workforce, I'm hoping you can pick that up, and others do chip in as required as well.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to probably pick on Anna to help me out a little bit with this one, actually. But in terms of some of the things that we're seeing within NHS and wider government, the focus on GDS and DDAP, so the digital data and technology frameworks around skills and capabilities, feels really well aligned actually to helping the NHS be better at delivering really consistent transformations that are digitally enabled. And certainly what we've seen with a number of our NHS clients is a revisiting of the way that they are structured around their IT organisation and digital organisation, which have historically been quite separate. And so what we found with the sort of DDAP framework, the GDS guidance, and a change in mindset around what the CDIO function represents, that actually there's a great opportunity there to sort of streamline and make the whole organisation function much more efficiently and effectively around these sorts of large-scale technology transfer, digital transformations that genuinely need a focus on digital solutions, a genuine focus on data, and a genuine focus on the sort of underlying technical technology infrastructure that has to be there. Anna, I don't know if you want to add to that at all.
Yeah, I'll just chip in from a sort of non-technical perspective. I think in the context of the NHS is a very massively complex system of systems. And I think that within kind of NHS transformation, the ability to share best practice and align at a system level is a massive challenge, but is a really important one to get right. And I think that the multiple different layers at which the system operates, there is probably a need to reflect at this point in time around some of these areas where it has worked well, and seek to kind of clarify what the role is of each of the tiers within the system of where that change needs to happen. I think we would kind of recommend focusing, taking a bit of time to think and reflect on what are the changes that have already worked well that you'd look to optimize and accelerate. Where are those areas that perhaps you haven't made as much change as possible? And then in those areas, seeking to identify and find bits of best practice and replicate those elsewhere. And then what actually are those things that perhaps you do want to undo slightly? So where there might have been negative change that you can reverse. I'm conscious we are, I think, over our time, so I will pause there and hand back to Emily.
Great, thanks, Anna. So I think that's it for the Q&A. We will add any final questions. We'll get back to you via email after this webinar. So we will just hand over now to Jonathan and Tayo just to close off the webinar.
Thank you very much, Emily, and thank you to all our virtual audience for your questions and your time. In closing, we would love to hear from you and continue the conversation. So if you've heard something that really resonated with you, please do get in touch. Our contact details should be visible to you, and you can connect with us via LinkedIn as well if that is your preference. You can also visit our website, where we already have a collection of thought-provoking perspectives, and in the coming weeks, we'll be adding more material that is aligned to the 5 themes that we have just been discussing. I will now hand over to Jonathan for some brief closing remarks from the MPA, but on behalf of myself and the Moorhouse team, I'd like to thank you for tuning in.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tayo. That was great. And thank you to everybody at Moorhouse for such a brilliant job of pioneering our first member-delivered webinar. And thank you as well to Tanya, Mark, and the whole of the team at Bentley who've hosted so wonderfully for us. Don't forget, we have our next member-delivered webinar on the 7th of August, and that's WNG, HS2, and Sir Robert McAlpine, who will be explaining how to eliminate modern slavery from major projects. So we're tackling a very big issue there. And if you work for an MPA organization and would like to contribute to this monthly program on behalf of the association, then come and talk to us about the webinars or the webinar that you could deliver. So thank you everybody for listening, and that's it for the webinar.